In this video, I'll show you how I designed this vintage bootleg style graphic of Kendrick Lamar. Let's get it. The first thing we got to talk about before we actually jump into the design is how I'm using the canvas in Photoshop. Now this is very different than probably most tutorials that you'll see. I have been using this method for a few weeks now, and to me it works very well. It makes the design process a little bit more interesting and exciting, and actually lends itself very well to the printing process as well, especially if you're using DTG. I'll show you exactly how this is done, and I will say that this is a very large file, so if there's any worry that your computer's not going to be able to handle this sort of thing, no worries, just follow along with me on a regular canvas. It might not look exactly like my design does, but you'll get the methods down at the very least. So let me break down how I'm doing this so that you can set up your own mock-up. First of all, this shirt is literally just a Hellstar mock-up. Shout out to Shawnee and Hellstar. I just grabbed it because I thought it looked cool. It sort of has a little bit like a 3D body look, but not all the way like 3D hyper realistic sort of techie thing. And it's got a vintage wash, so I really like that. I added in some distressing here, but let's talk about how this is actually broken down. So the very bottom is our mock-up, and then we've got a blend if group. So this is where all of the artwork is gonna go. It's essentially just its own group. And then if you double click into here, I've got the blend if set up so that it's going to basically remove the black from the design as I go. And so if you just want to copy these settings here, current layer 50/106, 255, set it up like that. The next is a levels adjustment layer, and that's clipped to the blend if group. That's just adding a little bit of extra sauce. It's sort of blowing out the graphic a bit. So you can play around with these settings, but here's what I'm using for the levels adjustment. Now all of this, the blend if group and levels are in their own group, okay? So it's like a group within a group. This group is what's going to give us a little bit of an offset print. So I've got an inner shadow with white as the color, blend mode, normal, opacity 90%, distance at 9, size at 1, okay? And all of this I can explain as we go, but it's how you're getting this sort of like offset, sort of vintage looking print over here on the left. So you can set that up. Then at the top, I've got a hue and saturation adjustment layer as well. If you ever want to increase the saturation, play around with the hue, you can do that here. I would recommend turning off this layer as you're designing, because if not, you're gonna be picking out certain colors and they're gonna be affected by this layer, and you might forget that it's on and just be confused. So just keep it off. Let's bring in this photo of Kung Fu Kenny. I searched by images larger than 2 megapixels on Google Images, and I was looking for, a photo that was a bit more serious. I wasn't looking for necessarily, the smiling, it's all good Kenny. I wanted to find like a portrait style photo, and so this works perfectly. We'll right click, copy image, go back to our canvas, and we're gonna paste into this blend if group. So Command V, and you'll see right off the bat, it already has like more of a vintage look than it would normally, right? And so that's because we're using that blend if layer, the levels, the offset print, all of that plays into this. So I'm just gonna size this up so it's similar to what you're seeing on the left side. And then we're just gonna go to Window, Properties, and I'll just use the classic, quick actions, remove background. Click that. Should do a pretty good job because the background is blurry and there's like nothing behind him, so that's great as well. So yep, pretty clean cutout. I think I am gonna go in here and sort of finesse a little bit of the edges. I'll just zoom in and make sure everything looks good. Yeah, I mean, it's decent. Like, you could probably just run with this, but I am gonna jump into the layer mask by double clicking this layer mask thumbnail and just sort of smooth out the edges a tiny bit and try to get rid of some of this sort of ghost halo around the edges. So to do that, I'm going to increase the feather, and then I'm going to increase the contrast a bit and just sort of keep my eye on this image as I'm doing this, and just try to smooth out this edge. Normally, if I wanted to bring out more detail in someone's hair, I would use refine hair at the top and then click decontaminate colors over here on the right side. With this particular style, like lack of detail actually works. So I'm not really worried about that here. I'm just trying to get, you know, a pretty clean cutout. And so I might use shift edge here a little bit. If you use it too much, it can sort of like take away like too much detail. So again, you just have to like keep your eye on this, make sure it doesn't look too like sketchy on the left. Okay, this should work. And then I'm just gonna go in and sort of finesse some of these little pockets that are kind of hard to get to in the layer mask, right? So to do that, I'm just gonna zoom in, and then I'm gonna make sure that I'm using like a soft round brush. 19 pixels should work. And then I'll make sure the layer mask thumbnail is selected over here and the foreground color is set to black. And then I'll just go in here and basically like erase like these areas, right? So these are sort of artifacts left over from the original image that remove background just wasn't able to get to. It's good. It ain't that good. And with this, like, I'm gonna leave a little bit of this ghost halo because I don't want to completely lose like the silhouette. And so I'm just gonna like make it look less, you know, like sketchy. But yeah, I'm not gonna like totally remove all of this because again, I think it works with this style. Okay, this should work. Pretty clean cutout of our photo here. And so what I'll typically then do is Command J so that I have the original that I can always go back to at any time. And then I'll right click on this copy and I'll just go to convert to smart object. So from here, I'm gonna cut out two different areas of this photo. We're gonna do the skin tones and the rubber bands in his hair because I like that little like pop of red in the original photo. And then we'll apply 3 different gradient maps. So let's jump into that. And I'm just gonna use the polygonal lasso tool to cut out all these sections. If you wanna use the pen tool, that's cool as well. This is just what I prefer. And so let's get into it. We've got our selection of the skin tones. And by the way, if you're not sure of how to add more selections, you just gotta make sure this second box at the top is checked that says add to selection. And I'm just gonna hit Command J with this smart object selected so that now we've got the skin tones just on their own layer. And the next thing I'm gonna jump to is these rubber bands. So we'll get in here and just again use the polygonal lasso tool and cut all of these out. We'll do the same thing with these as we did to the skin tone. So I'll go down to the original layer, Command J, and I'm just gonna rename these rubber bands. Then I'll rename this skin tones, and then I'll rename this original photo. All right, so we've got our 3 layers and now we can apply gradient maps to all 3. So we'll start with the original photo. Down here at the bottom of the layers panel, I'll just bump this up here. At the bottom of the layers panel, you can click this little half circle and then go down to gradient map. And then right away, right click and create clipping mask. So now it's just clipping to this original photo. It doesn't look much different because I think he was wearing like a black and white outfit. So we're using a black and white gradient map. And you know, you can adjust it a little bit if you want. If you want to bring more of the white into the outfit, you can do that by just bumping over this right stopper, which is like the highlight. So I'm gonna bring in more of that detail here. Say 70, actually maybe a little bit less. Let's go 75, cool. Okay, now the next thing we'll do is add another gradient map for the rubber bands. So same process. Gradient map, right click, create clipping mask onto the rubber bands, right? And then we'll jump into the gradient map and I'm going to make it red, I believe just red, white, and black, right? So we've got our black and white here. Now we just need to add a stopper in the middle of red. And I'm just gonna grab it from our image over here. And then I know it's gotta be a bit brighter. So I'm just going to update that. And then I'm just gonna save out this gradient map in case we need to use it later. I'm sure we will. Cool. Click OK, and now I'm going to hit new. And so now we've got this gradient map saved out that we can use later. Now lastly, we'll add a gradient map to the skin tones. Now remember, when you're using gradient maps, you gotta make sure that you have the thumbnail selected. If you don't, you're not gonna see this properties window with the gradient map that you can jump into like this and then use the editor. Now for the skin tones, I used my Bootleg skin tone gradient maps pack from the site. I think I landed on this one, and then I changed the colors slightly and then saved it out to this. I just adjusted the colors to reflect more of Kendrick's actual like skin tones. And so I just basically changed out some of these stoppers, clicked new like you just saw me do with this red, and that was it. I believe it looks a little bit different here because of the hue and saturation layer, right? So we'll get to that when we get to that. So that is basically done. Now the only thing we'll want to do is group all of these together so it's a little bit easier to work with, and then we'll add a gradient to the bottom just to get that nice fade, right? So we'll just highlight this top layer and then hold down the shift key and click the bottom layer right here, and then Command G, and I'm just going to call this Kendrick main photo. And then like I said, I'm gonna double click into this whole group and then add this gradient overlay. And you'll just wanna make sure you select this black to transparent. So as long as your foreground is set to black, you should see black right here for this second option. So click that, and then I'll change the scale to 10%, and then just bring it down like this, right? Get a nice natural fade on the bottom, click OK. So from here, I'm just gonna keep building out this sort of photo collage. And so we'll jump into this other photo of Kendrick on the left. And so again, I tried to find something that was sort of within this same era. I believe this is a similar era to here. And again, very serious, sort of like stoic looking pose. We're gonna right click, copy image, back to our canvas, Command V to paste it in. And it actually looks pretty fire with that blue, I'm not gonna lie. I thought about using the blue, but I was like, I don't know. I feel like Kenny is so like synonymous with using like red and black specifically that it just made sense to keep that as the color palette. So now I'm just sizing this up, trying to get it to look like it does on the left. And again, we should have a pretty easy time cutting out this image just using window, properties, quick actions, remove background. See how it does. Cool. Yeah, I mean, pretty clean. Let's just zoom in here and see if it looks all right. Yeah, I mean, we can definitely clean this up a little bit. So we'll jump into the layer mask and do the same thing we did on the other photo. Just gonna increase the feather a bit, increase the contrast, and we're gonna have to do it probably less on this because it is just a smaller photo. So it's probably gonna be mostly increasing the contrast, to be honest. Cool, I don't think we'll need to shift the edge at all, but I am just gonna finesse a little bit, again, just with the brush. So go in here and sort of fix these little pockets. And the cool thing is that, you know, because we're using gradient maps, like a lot of this stuff, like the little tints of blue and things, like they don't really matter. It's not like I need to get this to be like just sort of black and white. You know, that's the beauty of using gradient maps. It sort of just like levels the playing field for all of the colors in a photo. I'm honestly just doing it because I think it's just gonna look better, but like the fact that it's blue doesn't matter. What's cool about using the blend if method is that it just naturally removes a lot of the detail. And so unlike what we needed to do on the right side where we added that gradient fade on the bottom, we don't really need to do that with this photo. And so I think part of that is just because of the photo naturally, but then yeah, using that blend if method really helps out with that. So now just like we did on this main photo, I'm going to duplicate this layer, hide the original, right click and convert it to a smart object. And then we're gonna go in and cut out the different sections and add the gradient maps. We've we've got the skin tone selected, Command J, and I'll rename this Skin Tones, rename this Original Photo, and then we'll add a gradient map to the original photo. Right click, create clipping mask, and just the default colors are probably gonna work fine for that. So we'll jump up to the skin tones layer, add a gradient map there, right click, create clipping mask, and then we'll use the one that we saved out right here. Cool, click OK. All right, so we've got our two main photos. Let's just group all of these layers together, and we'll call this Kendrick left photo. If you really love this style, I highly recommend checking out my full-length video course called Bootleg Blueprint. It's a 4-hour video course that goes way more in depth on the entire design process. Everything from getting inspired and researching, finding the right fonts, using the right colors, perfecting your layouts. Basically everything I've learned in the past 15 years of designing in this style for some of the biggest artists on the planet. Just hit the link in the description of this video. Now for this background image, I use the StockUp plugin. If you're not familiar with this, it's essentially a plugin that I developed, and it allows you to search millions of stock photos directly from Photoshop. So these are all copyright-free photos. All the authors are credited here, and you can link out to the original work just by clicking right here. And so I searched temple. I thought that made sense with the whole, legend of Kung Fu Kenny sort of vibe. And so I found this photo. And honestly, it was the first one I tried out, and I was like, this is meant to be, right? So then I just click the photo and it drops it right in, move it over, and then we'll size it down. And I basically wanted this like temple entryway to land sort of right in the middle of the t-shirt. So let's rename this background photo. Now I'm gonna mask out this background photo because we've got some of these details going all the way to the edge of the shirt, and I wanted to have more of a faded look. So to do that, I'm just gonna make sure it's highlighted, and then down at the bottom, I'm gonna click layer masks. So I'll click that, and then I'll make sure that the layer mask thumbnail is highlighted. And again, go back to our soft round brush, but this time I'm gonna increase the size quite a bit. And then using black as the foreground color, I'm just gonna paint out some of these details around the edges and sort of bring it back into the canvas of the t-shirt. So like this, right? And that's really it. Like this photo just naturally has like a really good fade as well. And so I don't really need to do much to any other areas of the photo. From here, I'm just gonna add a gradient map over the entire thing. So I'll go down to create new fill or adjustment layer right here, click gradient map. So unlike the other gradient maps in this graphic, I don't need to clip it to anything because it's just gonna be kind of sitting in the background and covering the entire photo. But I do need to change out the colors. So I'll make sure this thumbnail is selected, go into this gradient map, use the editor, and then I'll use the same colors that we used in these rubber bands. And then I'll probably just finesse it a little bit to bring in more of the red. I do think I'm gonna swap out this color though, because it's looking a little bit too orange compared to what we're seeing on the left side. And that's just something that was kind of hard to tell when we were working with these small like rubber bands over here. So I'll just click into this color and we'll change this more to like a red. So I think the tone itself is good, but yeah. So we'll do more like this. And then I think any other change from here is just gonna be using that hue and saturation layer at the top. So let's save this out by clicking new. So now we've got this red value locked in. Now, I remember when I was originally doing this graphic and I got to this part and I was thinking like, man, I don't really love that there's this solid sort of chunk of white in the middle of the t-shirt. And so I just tried changing this highlight stopper over here on the right side to black, and it actually looked decent. Like normally that would look really unnatural and strange. In this case, like it does a little bit, but I think it also lends itself to sort of the mystique like and the theme of this design. And so it worked, and I just kept it like this. Clicked OK, and then I got the idea of adding the smaller photo of Kendrick in the entryway. I'm just gonna highlight both of these layers, group them together, and name this background just to keep organized. So here's the photo I found. Originally, my idea was just to have him as sort of a silhouette in that entryway. But then I thought that this photo, like with the little bit of detail, worked well. So we'll right click, copy image, back to our canvas, Command V, and paste it in. We'll drag it over, and it was like, yeah, it was like almost the perfect size right away, which was crazy. I just sized it up a little bit and then did remove background. And I believe we had to remove Dave Free from this. Sorry, man. Edit, fill. So now we've got Kendrick back here, and it's funny, like the skin tones were like pretty close already, that like, for a moment, I was like, I can probably just keep this as a full color photo. But then I decided to ultimately go with black and white as the gradient map over the top. So just add a gradient map here. I believe it's just the default gradient map. We'll clip it to the photo, and then I'll just edit the colors a little bit, sort of lessen the detail here. So that just kind of worked out perfectly with the size of that photo, and I was able to quickly remove the background. Now let's jump into this text right here. Ultimately, I just wanted to make it like very simple. And so using literally times was a very deliberate choice. It wasn't to be lazy or make it plain. It was honestly just like, I wanted it to be like a very sort of serious, straightforward graphic. And also like Kendrick has used that before, like the Damn album artwork, I think is just Times New Roman. So like it sort of works within his brand as well. So let's get this text added in here. Type out Kendrick. We'll change the font to Times. I'm just gonna size this up. So we'll make some adjustments to the spacing with these characters. I'll open up the characters window, and then I'll just bump some of these over a little bit so it's just a little bit closer together. The effect on this text is actually just a layer style from my Bootleg Rap Textiles Pack Volume 2. So I'll double click into this text, go up to styles. I've already got it installed. I'll open up that folder, and it was the very first option. Now I just made some modifications to this, so I'll click show all effects right here because we're gonna be adding a few things. Now the first thing I'll modify is the gradient overlay. So we'll swap out this sort of orange color for this red that we're using in our graphic, right? And then I'm just gonna lose the white entirely. Then I'll bring this red stopper all the way to the left, so it's just going from red to black. Click OK. The next thing I did is I added a secondary stroke on the inside. So I'll click this plus button right here, and then I'll change the position to inside. I'll change the color to black, okay? And then the last thing I did was I added a drop shadow, right? So I'll click drop shadow, change the color to white, change the blend mode to normal, opacity up to 100%, size to 0, and then I'll just increase the distance a bit. Just sort of eyeballing it, looking at that text on the left. So that should work. And then I'll go to styles, and I'll click new style just to save this out in case we want to use it later. And so this text is good to go. Now, the next thing I did is I added this sort of arch to it, right? So you'll want to convert it to a smart object to do that. Anytime you're using a gradient and you add an arch, like it's not going to apply it in the way that you want it to. It's just gonna apply it to like the bottom of the text. So it's not gonna give you the full gradient effect. And so what we're gonna do is convert this to a smart object, and we'll first duplicate it in case we need to go back to the original, trying to work as non-destructively as possible. So then we'll right click on this copy, go down to convert to smart object. Now at the top, we're going to see this little sort of curved grid looking thing that says switch between free transform and warp modes. So we'll click that. Here we see warp, and we've got a drop down, and we'll select arc lower, and then we'll change the bend to -20. And then we'll just free transform this, right? So you're either gonna wanna hold down the shift key or not hold it down depending on your settings, but we don't wanna maintain the aspect ratio because we're really sort of like stretching this text, right? gonna stretch it down like this. And then we're gonna bring it down, and we're actually gonna have to move this underneath this smaller image of Kenny right here so that he's sort of overlapping it, right? So that should work. I'm gonna bring this photo of Kenny on the left over to the right a little bit, just using the arrow key to bump it over. So now we need to add Lamar on the bottom. So I'm gonna use this original Kendrick text that we still have because it's live right now. And I'll just duplicate it, Command J, and then I'll bring it up to the very top layer. And then we'll just bring it down, make it visible. And then we'll just type out Lamar. Cool. And then we're gonna size it up. So now we're maintaining that same effect that we used on the top, and we're just gonna need to bend this, and we're gonna do the same thing. So I'll duplicate it, hide the original, right click and convert to smart object. And then we'll use the same bend as the top, but we'll just sort of invert it. So we'll click again this switch between free transform and warp modes at the top. And this time we'll select arc upper, and then we'll go -20, right? Free transform this. We're just gonna sort of stretch this out so that it works with the bottom of our graphic. And then typically what I'll do if I'm trying to match the top text to the bottom is I'll just make sure that I have smart guides on so that I can see it sort of lining up. If you don't see the smart guides, go to View, Show, Smart Guides. And then that way, as I'm like stretching this text, I can look at this left side and see that purple line, which means it's aligned perfectly with that top text, right? Cool. And I think the text overall is actually like kind of bigger than it is on the left side. So I'm just gonna make that adjustment here, just these small details. So we're looking good. Let's get this photo of Kenny on the bottom left added in here. So that's gonna go right under the Lamar text. So I'll highlight that layer, go back to our photos, and here is the original. Right click, copy image. I basically just wanted like something that would fill in that sort of horizontal space at the bottom. I thought about adding the van from the Good Kid, Mad City album cover. It didn't quite work. I felt like it also didn't work with like the theme, but I just wanted like something to sort of fill up this negative space. And so this photo worked great. We'll paste it in here, move it over, size it up a bit. So now we'll just click remove background, and I'll position this photo a little bit differently. So I'll move this down just like this, and then we'll edit out some of this stuff. So I'll make sure this layer mask thumbnail is selected, make sure the foreground is set to black, use a brush here. I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller, soft round brush. We're just gonna paint out some of this stuff. And I think that's all we need to do other than adding the gradient map. Again, just like small detail here at the bottom, gradient map, and we are gonna wanna clip this. And I'm just gonna move the low light a little bit to the right so that we have a bit less detail. I sort of wanted it to be sort of like a silhouette kind of at the bottom. Cool. And I'm going to remove part of the detail from this photo because I don't like that you can like see it right here. And so we'll just go back to this original photo, Kendrick left photo and original photo. All right, so we're just gonna mask this out. So I'll click layer masks and then go into the layer mask thumbnail using this black and just get rid of that. Cool. So here's a small detail that I noticed over here on this left side. There's a lot more of this background showing right here, and I really like that, and it's not happening in our recreation on the right side. So I want to make sure that we get those details. I think all that I did was just stretched out that background photo a bit more. So I'm just going to go down to this background photo. I'm holding down the shift key and I'm just going to stretch it down so that we get more of that detail. Really doesn't change, you know, the way the background is presented or like affect it in any way that like makes it look unnatural, to me at least. Now I'm just gonna bump it up a bit and sort of reposition it so that's still in the center, but that we get, you know, a little bit more of that detail that we're seeing right here. So Cool, that looks good. So while we're on this background, I think I'm gonna edit this gradient map slightly because I'm just seeing like fewer details over here. And I think that's because this right stopper just needs to be moved to the left a bit. So we want less detail there. Cool. All right, that looks better. Let's bring in these throwing stars on the left and right side. So here's the photo I found, and I went with this because it had sort of a different angle to it and like a different perspective than a lot of these other images, which are just straight on. So this looks like it could potentially look like it was sort of being thrown, which is the effect that I wanted. So I'll just right click this, copy image, back to Photoshop, and this is going over everything. So we'll jump up to our top layer, close some of these groups, and Command V will paste in this image, show transform controls so I can see where it is. And then I'm just gonna size it up a little bit, not too much. Cool. And then we'll just zoom in here, and I'm gonna just try remove background, and then we'll probably have to make some edits to it. All right, so it did a decent job, but obviously we gotta get rid of this. So I'm just gonna use the polygonal lasso tool, sort of go around here, make the general shape. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but I want to get it decently close. And I'm keeping some of this background because I feel like it would actually be part of the metal. So I'll get rid of this. So with this layer mask thumbnail selected, go to edit, fill. Cool, and then I'm just sort of looking at this to make sure I'm cool with it. I think I'm gonna use a hard round brush and sort of just go in here and make this like curve a little bit more natural. Down here as well. So from here, I duplicated the throwing stars, hid the original, right click, and convert to smart object on the top ones. And then I'm just gonna end up actually right clicking again and rasterizing the layer, because now we're just gonna reposition these and we're gonna split them apart. So I'm just gonna grab one of these, bring it over here, and increase the size a bit. And I believe sort of reposition it more like that. Cool. And then this one, I'm going to just move over here and I think make a little bit smaller, but I don't think I really changed the angle or anything. Next, I'm gonna add a gradient map to both of these throwing stars. So to do that, I'm just gonna put them in their own group. So I'll highlight both of these layers, Command G, put them in their own group. I'll rename it throwing stars, and then I'll go down to gradient map, add that, clip it to the group, and it's just gonna be the default black and white gradient map, but I am going to adjust the stopper on the left a bit here. So it's leaning a little bit more towards gray versus white. And then we are going to, so yeah, probably 50. And then we are going to bring out a little bit more detail in the throwing stars, literally just with brightness contrast. I don't think you need to get like crazy into levels adjustments and all that. So I'll just go to image, adjustments, brightness contrast. We'll start with the one on the left. We'll bring down the brightness a little bit, bring up the contrast, and I'm just trying to bring out like some of those metallic sort of details. That looks good. Do the same thing with the throwing star on the right. Use legacy, down on the brightness, up on the contrast. Now the $1 million question, how did I get these trails on the throwing stars? Let me show you. So I used a little bit of a cheat code here. It's a plugin called Eye Candy. And so I'll select this throwing star on the right and then go to Filter, Exposure Software, Eye Candy 7. If you're not familiar with Eye Candy, I'm sure there's some YouTube tutorials about it. You can check it out. You can do all these different effects. It's pretty dope. For this one, I used Motion Trail. And so essentially, I just sort of tried to eyeball, how I wanted it to be positioned. I wanted it to look like it was coming from behind sort of Kenny's head. So you're able to play with the length and taper and all this stuff. And so I just made those adjustments here. I honestly don't remember the exact settings I used from this. Like there's so many small little things you can change. So we're just gonna try to get it close. So I'll click OK. and we'll see what this looks like. So eye candy definitely does require some added processing power from your computer. So if you don't want to use that, you know, to make these motion trails, you could always just go to like filter, blur, you know, path blur, motion blur, something like that. It's such a small detail, you honestly don't even need it, but you know, if you didn't want to use eye candy, you could always use the native sort of blur tools in Photoshop. So this looks decent. I think that's gonna work. Now it's gonna create two copies. We've got the original here and then the eye candy version, so we can hide our original version and can sort of just like play around with this, make sure it's placed exactly how we want it. I want it to overlap the text a little bit more. So I'm just gonna sort of reposition it here. And then we're gonna add the same effect to this throwing star left. So we'll go to filter, exposure software, eye candy, and then we're just gonna change the basically the direction of the blur, right? Cool. Okay, and you can see a little bit of that trail here. So I'm just gonna mask this out and use the brush tool and just get rid of that. Like this. Whoops, it's huge. Just like that, cool. So now let's get this text added in here. It made a lot of sense to me to use like a triangular sort of composition for it. So in order to do that, I selected the triangle tool and then I went up to my top layer and I just drew out a triangle. Very simple. And then I selected the horizontal type tool and I clicked inside of it. And that essentially allowed me to create text inside of the triangle, right? So it fills in that shape. And so now I just had to go out and find the lyrics I wanted to use. This is from Euphoria. I grabbed this sort of set of text, copied it, Command C, and then back to our canvas, highlight all this, I'll delete it, Command V, paste it in. Then I just played around with the sizing of it and the spacing, right? So I just increased the space between all of the letters. And this is gonna be hard to replicate over here, I'll be honest. So I'm gonna do my best, but you know, we'll just get it as close as we can, right? So I'll just start off with like 80 and you can just sort of use the scroll on your mouse to edit the size of this. It's a bit faster. And I just wanna make sure that the entire line fits in here. Then we're gonna go to Window, Paragraph, and we're gonna justify all of this text. So right here on the very far right says justify all, we'll click that. So now I'm just gonna play around with the sizing and the space of this text. I'm not gonna bore you with that, but I do wanna mention that you should probably have hyphenate unchecked over here, and you'll find this under paragraph. So I did switch up the layout a little bit versus what we're seeing on the left. I like that it now starts with just I, like a single letter. I think that's cool, I don't know. So I made those changes. Now lastly, I just added K-Dot and Top Dog Entertainment present Euphoria on the bottom. So I'll just click down here. This is a lot more straightforward. We're not gonna like worry about creating shapes and like spacing and all that stuff. So Top Dog Entertainment present Euphoria, size that up so it matches this, and then we'll increase the spacing. I think I used like 200. I'll just sort of position it in the middle, bump it up a bit. So from a design and composition standpoint, this design is complete, but what I always recommend is whenever you think you're done with a design, spend another 15-20 minutes on it and just see if there's any other extra sort of like bells and whistles, extra sauce that you can add to the design. I feel like that's really where the magic happens. So early on in this video, I mentioned that hue and saturation layer. So let's go ahead and click that on, and we'll double click into the properties so that we can play around with these and just see if, you know, there's anything we want to adjust. Like maybe we do want to make it a bit brighter. Here's a bonus tip. I've been adding this effect to a lot of designs that have photographs of people. It sort of gives it a more, I guess, cinematic feel to it. So what I'll do is I'll highlight all of these layers, hit Command G, put them all in a group, duplicate the group. I'll right click on the copy and go to merge group. Now this already looks kind of interesting, but this is not what we're doing. Feel free to experiment, but we're gonna keep going and hit Command U, bring the saturation down to -100, click OK, then go to Filter, Other, High Pass. So you have to play around with high pass because you don't want it to have no details like you're seeing here. So increase the radius until you start to see some of the details from the original photo. Like around 150 is usually good. So I'll click OK, it's at 153. And then I'll change the blending mode of this layer to soft light. Okay, so as you can see, that just adds a little bit of extra sauce. You can play around with the brightness and contrast of this layer if you want to. Now here's the final trick, and I think this is gonna blow some of your minds. If I remove the mockup and I remove the background, this is essentially print ready artwork, right, for DTG. Now again, I always say this in videos, I'm not a printer, but I've sent this type of artwork to print for DTG and it's worked great. You might have to finesse, you know, maybe the blend if layer a little bit more, work with your printer, but this is gonna get you a lot closer than if you had, you know, basically solid shapes and photos and things like that. So if I were to send this off to print, I would hide this mockup on the left, of course, highlight all of these layers, right click, merge the layers. Then I'd go to Image, Trim, Transparent Pixels is selected, top, left, bottom, right is all selected under Trim Away. Click OK, and that's essentially just going to reduce it down to all of the pixels that are being used. Get rid of this background layer, save this out as a TIFF, a PNG, whatever is required from, you know, your printer, and you should be good to go. I hope you learned something today. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.